Chapter 1058, A Tool. Tonight at 10. Looking at Miss Messenger, who stayed in place, Klein walked to the desk and wrote, "I'll be on time." In addition, the situation in Backland has become tense recently. Make sure to keep the matter under control. After reminding Sharon, Klein folded the letter and took out a gold coin and a rectangular diamond that kept refracting light. This is a yesterday once more charm. It can allow you to temporarily borrow powers from your past self. Klein handed the 3 items to Rionette Tynecare. One of the blonde, red-eyed heads in Rionette Tynecare's hands opened its mouth and bit down on everything. The remaining 3 said, "Why? Give me. Count it as part of the remuneration I'll be paying in advance," Klein said with an ordinary smile. Arrodes's reminder made him feel that it was imperative to make more preparations. Rionette Tynecare didn't ask further. The 4 beautiful heads bobbed up and down from their hair as though they were nodding. She then stepped into the void and vanished from the room. Looking at the light rain and the dark sky outside the window, Klein took off his coat and handed it to his valet, Inuni. 9:50 p.m. on a street near the Tussock River in Sherwood Borough. In the commonly seen autumn-winter rain in Backland, a rental carriage turned in and slowly moved forward. On the carriage, the red-eyed Emlyn White, who was holding a top hat in his hand, looked at the young man with pale looks and disheveled hair before curling his lips. "Is it here?" The incorporeal figure, Merrick, nodded. He pointed to a neighboring building diagonally across at the shops over there and said, "That's right. That's a bookstore. The owner's name is Charlie Raker and is pure Lonese. However, he went to the southern continent once when he was young, hoping to become a tycoon. There, he became a member of the Rose School of Thought and a believer of the Chained God. He was later sent back to Backland and was made to gather intelligence, as well as provide assistance to the other Rose School of Thought members who are executing other missions. We've been watching him for a while and wish to finish him off and sever the source of intel for the Rose School of Thought so that we can create a better living environment for ourselves. However, we ultimately held back." Emlyn smiled and said, "The facts have proven that tolerance can indeed be exchanged for better results. To be honest, your performance is quite different from what I imagined for a temperance faction wraith. I thought you would be very terse." Merrick glanced at the vampire, who was already a viscount. Different people have different personalities, and temperance is only meant to control excessive desires. I'm afraid you wouldn't understand, and that it would affect the final result of the mission if I didn't explain this matter too clearly. That way, the desires that need temperance will exceed the limits of what it should be. Although it's very philosophical, there's no need to use me as an example." Emlyn leisurely leaned against the wall and looked at him. "Continue with the previous topic." Merrick looked out the window again. In Charlie Raker's house is a female servant from the Paz Valley. She's also a member of the Rose School of Thought. In addition, in the 2 houses diagonally opposite to Raker's house lives a widow and a male alcoholic. They're believers of the Chained God, and they would transmit information to the Rose School of Thought at critical moments. The thing you need to do is to secretly monitor these 3 people while we're dealing with Charlie Raker. Through the information sent, you'll be able to lock onto the person in charge of the Rose School of Thought in Backland. Of course, we'll definitely give Charlie Raker some opportunity to seek help or send out a signal." Emlyn nodded slightly and said, "I understand." He then turned his head to look at the sky, which had dark clouds that blanketed it, blocking out the crimson moon. He turned the ring with the ghostly blue gem on his ring finger. This was the Oath of Rose Ring. It allowed Earl Mistral to share his sense of sight, hearing, and smell. This ring went around one big circle and ended up back in Emlyn's hands. Of course, it was only temporary. As such, Earl Mistral had already heard what Merrick had said and shared it with the other sanguine participants. Emlyn originally believed that although he was only the intermediary who was in charge of communication and didn't play an important role, even if that were the case, he felt that he was able to showcase some of his spells as a Scarlet Scholar, allowing him to pass the information in a really cool and elevated manner in front of Wraith Merrick. To his surprise, he didn't need to do anything. All he needed was to be on scene wearing the ring. This made him very depressed, He felt that he was purely a tool. Without being a demigod, I'm not qualified to directly participate in many things, much less to save the race. At that moment, Lin felt a little impulsive. He felt that his level wasn't worthy of his secret identity, and that he was unable to bear the responsibilities he needed to bear. As for the Oath of Rose's effect of being able to allow the thoughts of the two wearers to appear in the minds of the other party from time to time, Lin wasn't worried. He had asked Miss Justice to hypnotize him so that he wouldn't think about matters that he didn't want the sanguine upper echelons from knowing tonight. Just as he had this thought, he suddenly heard Earl Mistral's voice. Arrogance, childish, naive. This is a particular thought of Earl Mistral that was transmitted by Oath of Rose. Hach. Lin scoffed inwardly as he began chanting a name. Ernst Boyar, Ernst Boyar. This Viscount had been hypnotized under the protection of Earl Mistral and had been volunteering at the Harvest Church for a long time. At that moment, Merrick glanced at Lin's expression and nodded. Your current attitude is reassuring. Very serious, very solemn, and very focused. Lin was first taken aback before he curled his lips slightly. Thank you. The second floor of the bookstore was Charlie Raker's house. This businessman was over 50 years old, and his parents had long passed away. Despite being never married, rumors had it that he had a few illegitimate children, but none of them lived with him. After instructing the servants to check if the house's windows were locked, he returned to his bedroom and poured himself a cup of red wine. He sat on the sofa and savored it in a relaxed manner. He was used to drinking some wine before sleeping. When he finished the red wine, Charlie Raker stood up and walked towards the bathroom. When he passed by the full-body mirror in the bedroom, he casually took a glance, and his body suddenly froze up. In the mirror, his face had unknowingly turned abnormally pale. His eyes were protruded, and blood was seeping from the edges. The corners of his lips were slightly red. As a member of the Rose School of Thought, Charlie Raker wasn't unfamiliar with such a situation. He didn't scream or run recklessly like ordinary people. Instead, he raised his right hand and extended it to his chest. Just as he touched the accessory he was wearing, his body felt like it had fallen into an unmeltable icy abyss. It was cold from the inside to the outside. The cold seemed to have a life force of its own as it expanded rapidly and covered every corner of Charlie Raker's body. It made him feel like his joints and muscles no longer belonged to him as they began to abide by the commands of others. At that moment, it was as if there was another person in his body. It was cold and blurry, filled with malice. It directly took over everything other than his thoughts. At the same time, Charlie Raker saw new changes to his body in the mirror. Two figures appeared in his eyes. One was a young man in a white shirt and black vest. With his right hand having made contact with the object at his chest, a bright light flashed in front of him. The light seemed to come from a miniature sun, casting light and heat in every direction. Charlie Raker immediately felt warmth and was no longer controlled by the cold in his body. He blurted out a word, "Cleanse." The miniature sun in front of his chest burned intensely. It was like warm water that surged into his chest, forming ripples. With that, Charlie Raker regained control of his body and gave up on the door. Instead, he ran towards the window. The curtain wasn't drawn, and it was drizzling outside, dimming the street lights outside. Tab, tab, tab. When Charlie Raker walked past the carpeted coffee table area, he suddenly stumbled and nearly fell. The carpet seemed to come alive as it wrapped around his ankles. Bang! The coffee table flew up, and the porcelain teacup and all sorts of documents landed on Charlie Raker's face. It shattered to pieces, turning into a strange, dismembered puppet. Suddenly, Charlie Raker's figure appeared elsewhere as he continued running with a sense of fear lingering in his heart. He had never hated his bedroom for being this big before. Tab, tab, tab. Fountain pens shot randomly, and paper swatted around as Charlie Raker finally ran to the window. As a devout believer, he didn't break out of the window immediately. Instead, he held the curtain and pulled it. At the same time, he pressed his other hand onto the gas pipe. A layer of white frost instantly formed on the black metal surface. Cracked. The glass window in front of Charlie Raker shattered as every piece of glass flew out like a bullet and hit the merchant's face, piercing through his perfectly fine skin. It caused blood to gush out at his neck. Charlie Raker's eyes darkened, and he fell back weakly. During this process, he screamed and yelled, but his voice couldn't be heard beyond the room. At this moment, in another room, a maid from the southern continent could clearly see the light from the gas wall lamps shaking. She immediately turned her head and looked towards where her employer was, only to see that the gas pipes there were covered in white frost. In a house opposite to Charlie Raker, the brandy-nosed man, who had rolled up sleeves and gulping down alcohol, suddenly noticed that the curtains were only half closed. For the secret signal that he and Charlie Raker had agreed upon, having the curtains completely drawn meant that there wasn't a problem. Having half the curtains drawn or only one side meant an emergency situation. It required him to inform the higher-ups immediately. He abruptly stood up